Welcome back to On the Workbench. Today we're working on the 06 Saab 9.3, and today we've got an exhaust problem that we need to fix. The flex pipe underneath the vehicle has broken and we're going to need to replace it. So let's take a look at what we see under the vehicle that's broken, and we'll take a look at the parts and the tools and get this project together. We are now underneath the car, and here is the flex pipe. As you can see, this has completely rusted away from the rest of the assembly. Here's the little support hangers and the rubber bushings, and so that's the reason why this car's been making such an awful noise. But to replace this, the fix is going to be to actually come back, and we're going to have to make a cut back here, and then we're going to unmount the front of this from the catalytic converter, replace the gasket that goes on there for that connection, and then we're going to add a clamp up here to then connect this to the rest of the assembly. As this comes from the factory, this is all one piece, but they make a replacement part that we don't have to go all the way back, since our problem really is just this flex pipe here that's cracked away from years of use, hopefully not abuse. And so still good on the other end. This makes a really awful sound. It creates very little back pressure. The engine's not running very well. I can't even talk to my kids when they're in the back seat. And you can even see some of this little wire mesh here is tearing away, and it's got a little bit of sharp wire fibers there. So this needs to go. We're going to start by unbolting this from the front to be able to drop this piece down. Obviously I got the car jacked up on jack stands to get underneath the car. The tools that you're going to need to do this job are as follows. Number one, we're going to have safety glasses and work gloves to protect your hands and your eyes. You're also going to need a jack and jack stands I don't have here, and the ability to properly and safely jack up your car. And then we're going to need a 3/8 torque wrench. You may want a measuring tape, a light or 2 or 3 to go under your car to help you see. You may want 1 or 2 3/8 ratchets just to give you a hand, a couple extensions, 6 or 12 inch, give or take. You're going to want a file. You're going to need a 13 millimeter and a 17 millimeter socket. You may want, ideally if you had a 17 millimeter semi-deep would be perfect to help get your torque wrench into the tight space to fit the collar. And there's a 13 short as well. You can get by with any combination there. You also may want a white paint pen. You're going to need to mark your old exhaust to be able to know where your cut line is going to be. So a white paint pen works great for that, since it's easy to see a white mark on a rusty exhaust pipe than a black permanent marker. I think I already said the file. And then you can rent this from an auto parts store. It's just about a $50 deposit. And that's a exhaust cutter, or a chain action exhaust cutter. So you basically wrap this around your pipe and then turn it, and then eventually makes a nice clean cut around your exhaust. And then you got the file to be able to file it down completely smooth. You may want some lithium grease or so just to lubricate up the wheels there. You got the wheel on wheel action, a little grease will help that go a long way. And then finally, you also may want some exhaust hanger pliers to be able to remove the rubber exhaust hangers off of their clips to be able to get your parts out. The basic parts you're going to need for this repair are going to be obviously our new pipe assembly. So this has the flex pipe here and then the mounting rods on either side. This was a basil made, I believe, in the Czech Republic. I was wanting to get an OEM part or something close to it, but I believe this is as darn close as I'm going to get. And this was about $70. There we go, made in Czech Republic. And if you're going to replace that, you're also going to want to replace the gasket. So I got that. I've got new bolts, just because I'm going through this, I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to replace the rubber mounting bushings that go on the rods here. And then I also have a connector coupler. There's the part number for that, for this so-called muffler clamp. And then I also have these exhaust hanger clamps that will go on here to help to lock it in place to keep it from shifting. All right, so we're under the car. We've got 3 bolts to remove where this exhaust pipe comes off the catalytic converter. I've got a 13 millimeter socket on an extension. And then I'm just going to start removing these bolts. They're a little bit rusty, so you may need some penetrating lube to try to get them, to break them. And then that last one there just broke completely off, and it is now stuck. Oh, I sheared part of the stud. That's not good. Well, you can see that there's like part of the stud in the socket there. That might make for a bad day. We'll see how things go. As you saw a moment or two ago, you noticed that I actually ended up breaking off the bolt coming off the catalytic converter. And so here's what that looked like when I knocked it out of the socket here. You can see it sheared it and twisted it right off. And so then what I ended up having to do was then get out some cobalt drill bits. It's very important to use cobalt bits because they're much harder than the steel in here. And then I drilled out the stud. Now that stud is actually welded in from the top. And I was able to drill it out, and I had to work my way up through some of the smaller sizes to the larger sizes. And then I came back with a M8 by 1.25 tap. And so I did that with my tap socket and the tap and a ratchet. And as you can see here, I also managed to break my tap. But by the time it broke, I had enough threads cut that it was good enough. And then I was able to back this off with the locking pliers. And then I was able to install a stud. So I found a Dorman help kit. 01309. This is an M8 double-ended stud. This is theoretically for a Nissan, I think it says Nissan on here somewhere. Nissan right there. And I believe that'll work because the other studs are M8 by 1.25. And then I put some red thread locker on it. I also used a little cutoff tool on my Milwaukee M12 cutoff tool to kind of shear it off and cut off of what was still above the flange before I started drilling. So it was just kind of a big mess. I didn't show you that on camera because I don't think you would have wanted to. I mean, it actually may have been interesting to see, but it was just very, very tedious. And hopefully you don't run into all this. But that's my little sidebar here. So let's get back on course and get back under the car, and I'll show you what the stud looks like, my replacement stud looks like. And then we will start the process of trying to test fit the new one and marking it to know where we have to cut. Let's take a look a little more carefully at our new part. So this new part here has the flange, and with that we're going to be replacing the gasket. The gasket's pretty cheap by comparison, no reason not to replace this. This is obviously going to crush and create the seal that we need. So we obviously want a new gasket. If you look at these little barbs here, so it's going to help to hold it up and onto the studs. I'm going to also peel off the stickers that are on here. There's no reason to have that on and let it kind of burn off onto the car, so I'm going to peel that off before I go any further. And then the other piece of this, since the original exhaust on the car is actually all one piece, we're going to have to make a cut at the back end of the exhaust line so that we can use this combined with an exhaust clamp. And then this clamp will slide over here, and then the other part onto the other remaining piece of the exhaust. So we'll clamp it together. Then obviously these little fingers sticking out here are going to go into our gaskets, or I'm sorry, not gaskets, our rubber bushings. We will support that. I'm replacing these as well, just because if I'm there, I might as well. And so when we look at this, there's a couple key specs here to keep in mind. And so I'm going to be able to approximate where I need to make this cut, but there is an official measurement that Saab provides in their service manual, and that is to leave remaining 87 millimeters, or about 3.78 inches, from the backside of the center muffler. So back here, so this distance going back should be about 87 millimeters, or about 3 7/8 inches. If you've got a metric tape measure, you can get that right on and then mark it. I want to double check by test fitting this piece up and on to see if it lines up with that mark after I've made the mark, just to make sure that before I cut it, everything's going to line up. I've got a little bit of some wiggle room with this clamp, but ideally this would butt up against the other pipe as close as possible and a nice flush joint coming together. That would be ideal. We got some Torx to tighten the nuts. So we've got the Torx where this attaches to the catalytic converter up here. Should be, so then the nuts that go down here should tighten to 18.5 foot-pounds. And then the bolts on the clamp here should be tightened to 30 foot-pounds. To be making the exhaust on the mark for where my cut point needs to be, I'm going to be using a white paint pen. It'll just show up better than a permanent marker will on the rust, and it should just help make things easier to find when it comes to cutting. So here's a look at the flange, and right here is the new stud. You can see it's definitely shinier. It's a little bit longer than the other studs that are in there, but I think I should be fine. And you can see that red there is just some red thread locker to help hold it in place when I go to bring it to final torque. And so I feel like that actually came out pretty good of making making lemonades when life gives you lemons. So I actually feel pretty good about that fix. Hopefully you guys don't run into that, but that's how mine ended up after having to drill, tap, and rethread and kind of figure out an improvised solution for how to handle that. If you've ever done something like that, put in the comments below if you've got any thoughts or ideas, because doing that, yeah, that's not a lot of fun. And now hopefully you can see we've got our little hook assembly here that points, the fork points forward. And then we've got our old exhaust, or our current center exhaust here. And then what I need to do is go measure 87 millimeters from here forward to make my mark. Obviously before I cut it, we're gonna have to provide some independent support to this to be able to hold it up. So let's make the measurement here. And then I'm gonna double check that with the other piece. And so there is my theoretical cut line, marked in white with the paint pen. Now I'm going to do a test fit of the part to see if that lines up in approximately the right location to make sure that it's all going to work. And that actually seems like that might be just a little bit short from where I need to cut it. I might need to cut a little bit longer than what the guide said. Interesting. Hopefully you can see there. Let's see, over here I've got a jack providing the third hand to help to support the exhaust. And if I turn the camera, hopefully you can see here. Here is the original mark based on the 87 millimeters suggested by Saab, but here's another mark here based on test fitting the replacement part. Like if this is too long, after I get it cut out, I can always come back and then cut that back down to the suggested length. I'm going to start here because it's easier to cut like this more, and then bear in mind as I cut this piece here is going to get stuck in these rubber bushings here, and I'm going to use the chain cutter to do this. And I've already taken the chain cutter and sprayed it down with some white lithium grease just to make sure it's lubricated up for this cutting job. There we go, there's our cut. Now I'm going to come back with a file and try to file down these edges here. But I'm going to do another test fit here now that the other part is out of the way. I'm going to use the muffler pliers to be able to extract the old rubber bushings off here. Just like that. One and hopefully this is two. There we go. Those are both off. Well, look at that. Isn't that just perfect? That's just about right. Once I get that file down, this should be perfect to go inside that sleeve. There's a little burr here. I'll file that off, and then I should be just about perfect. Perfect, perfect, perfect. That makes me happy. That makes me really happy to see that. All right. All right, with the filing done, now I can think about moving on. And then I'll get my parts within reach here under the car. So then I think the next thing I'm going to do is put on my new rubber bushings. I hope you can see this. One and two. I'm going to put on my collar. I'm going to slide it back. And then I'm going to take my new gasket. I might have to take my gloves off for this one. And we're going to take our new gasket and put that in the front. These little barbs here are going to help to clip it down in place. All right, now with that front gasket in place, now it's time to try to fit in our new pipe. We've got these pieces to contend with here. We've got this, and we've got the fitting up front. And I'm going to start right here in the middle, getting this fit here. Or at least I'm going to attempt to get it fit. On second thought, I'm going to put the rubber bushings in afterwards. So we're going to bring this up to the bolts up front. And then we've got the gasket back, the connector there. And then now I can use my elbows to help hold it up front. And then to slide these bushings on here to help hold it back here. There we go, there's that side. And the other. And so now here I'm going to need to obviously get this. I'm going to try to flush it up by hand, pull the sleeve over it so that's about halfway. I'm going to start to hand tighten this, but then before I go too far, I want you to put the bolts in up at the top or up front. So hopefully you can see that now. You can see I've got my 3 studs. I've got my 2 original and my 1 new one. Just going to start threading on the new nuts. Hopefully you can see that new shiny gasket back there behind it. I'm not sure I got a good shot of that earlier on camera. And then my last bolt. My last nut, I mean. I'll be able to come back and get that tightened up there with the socket. And at the end, obviously, we've got a final torque that this has to get to. So we got those 3 bolts there to torque and the 2 bolts back at the junction to torque, and then we're good. And you can see we've got our nice new clean exhaust pipe here. Now it's time to start tightening. Now I'm just going to use a socket and ratchet here to lightly tighten these up before you start using the torque wrench to bring these to final torque. I'm going to try to just bring these in sequence up. And so now with each of these hand tightened down, I'm going to get out my torque wrench. And my torque wrench is set to 18.5 foot-pounds. And I'm going to now make sure I bring those up to proper torque. So it's a little bit of just clearance room under here for me trying to get all my tools around. but I think with a little bit of flexibility, we can do this. Sorry. There we go. There is the click on the torque wrench there. Okay, so now using a 17mm socket, I'm going to begin to hand tighten this coupler. And then eventually I'm going to get out the torque wrench to be able to firm this up to 30 foot-pounds. And once I've got it reasonably firm, I'm going to rotate this up so I don't create any issues with ground clearance, or don't unnecessarily detract from ground clearance. And then I'm going to continue the process. Now I feel pretty confident that I'm close. Time for the torque wrench. So to fit around the obstruction, I'm going to use a 1/2-inch socket with a 3/8 reducer to get my torque wrench up there. All right, time for final tightening with the torque wrench at 30 foot-pounds. If I had a mid-length socket, this would be the perfect use for that. Once you then verify that these bolts are at 30 foot-pounds, you can call this job done. And then you have your exhaust flex pipe replaced. All things considered, this is actually a relatively easy job, assuming you've got all the right tools to do it. The jack stands, and you can rent the cutting tool from the auto parts store. It's not that expensive, and as long as you don't end up accidentally shearing off one of the studs on the catalytic converter, it's not too bad. Even in my case, when I had one bad circumstance after another, because then I broke my tap at it. I was still in and out on this job here with about an hour and a half. Obviously, I'd rather not have broken the tap, but some days you just have to roll with it because it just sucks some days. Lets me just be blunt. And when bad things happen, you just have to have the right tools in your toolbox to respond to it. So it's not too bad of a job. Most people can probably do this with relative ease. And if you are attempting this repair, I wish you good luck. And if you've got any questions, comments, or other tips or tricks to put down below about this, I think myself and everyone else would welcome it. Found this video useful and interesting, give it a thumbs up. Look forward to seeing you back here for another great video. Have a great day.